Well, okay, so after they get this persona and like this customer profile, what would be the next thing that someone would go through?
After the persona and the customer profile, I like to look at, I like to start thinking a lot about channels. So channels is really important because you have to start ultimately creating lists. You have to create targeted lists, and everything is about volume when you're first starting out. When you're first kickstarting this process, it's all about like sending out a certain amount of prospecting emails, and it's a numbers game. That's how you jumpstart your growth. And then from there, you can start being way more strategic. You can start investing in targeting. You can do inbound, but it starts off as a numbers game. And what what happens is if you are going to prospect to 100 people, let's say, that week, and you expect 8 to 12%, 8 to 12% generally will reply, and you're going to close this, about 3% will become customers. Those 3% better be highly targeted, very specifically, picked people to become your customers, because all of a sudden those people are in your life. You're worried, you're thinking about them as you're making dinner, you're worried about, deploying your product for them as you're trying to sleep. And so you want to make sure that you think super hard about the channel and where you're finding these customers, because if you just say, oh, this looks like a list of people who might be our customers, cool, scrape it, you could end up in a world of problems later. So thinking really hard about the channels. And also it just makes your life easier when you're like, we need to keep the engine running. Where do we find the people?
Yeah.
That can trickle later into targeted advertising, or marketing, demand gen, things like that.
And would you recommend, when you talk about channels, I mean, would you recommend buying lists depending on the business industry? Would you recommend, going to trade shows and, getting, potential customers that way? Like, what sort of channels or what sort of actions would you take to start filling that pipeline?
Yeah, I don't recommend buying lists, not to start, because the historically the quality of a purchase list is really low. You're going to get anywhere from 10 to 30% of them are going to be bounces. So they're crap, they're throwaway, and a list isn't always cheap. So you have to think about the fact that you spend $2,000 on a list, and 30% of those names don't work.
Yeah.
And then, but also your list is only as good as what you articulated that you needed the list to be. So if you don't understand really, really solidly what that list needs to be and where it needs to come from, then you're not going to get a quality list. So I recommend people in the very beginning, it's total grind. Build your first couple lists yourself. Just do it yourself so you understand how to do it. And then you can start outsourcing. But then the next step is with the trade shows. I highly recommend trade shows, but not until you have one or two kind of example customers to point to that are successful. You don't want to go to a trade show where you're typically trying to get your like logos or your heavy hitters and being like, you're my first customer ever. That's not going to make anyone feel good. So, you generally want to get a couple under your belt, and then I definitely recommend getting to a trade show, because logos are really powerful, and that will just amp up the efforts. You can say, we work with this company and that company, and people are like, oh, you work with them, you must be okay then. So I think that's really important. But to start, the first few weeks of the process, and really from kind of 0 to 90 days is what I teach. Those first 0 to 90 days are a grind, and it's manual. You're just out there just getting the customers and seeing what works.
Yeah. And